wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Good day, and welcome to the Sunday Stoic podcast, where we discuss the ancient philosophy of Stoicism and how it applies to modern life. Steve has kindly agreed to let me do a solo episode today. The College of Stoic Philosophers offers several courses. The first course is called Stoic Essential Studies, wherein the student gets a solid foundation in the basics of Stoicism. After that, the student who wants to learn more progresses on to the Marcus Aurelius program, which includes several courses. The first three courses of the Marcus Aurelius program center around the three indispensable and interwoven topoi of the Stoic philosophical framework: logic, physics, and ethics. The fourth course is called Prosoche, which is the course I am completing now. In today's episode, we will discuss the Stoic spiritual exercise of keeping a Hypomnema journal and how it ties into the fundamental Stoic attitude, Prosoche. Now, I know many people will say, philosophical journaling? That sounds like a lot of work. I already have a job. I ain't doing that. And be tempted to stop listening. But please hear me out. I will try to make a persuasive case for why philosophical journaling is worth the effort. The topic of today's episode is hypomnema. Later, I will tie hypomnema into Prosoche, but first it might be prudent to define the concept. A hypomnema is a journal, wherein the philosopher or scholar record their thoughts on whatever they encountered during the day. Sometimes an entry might be an important academic or philosophical concept that was encountered during that day. This might be especially appropriate on a day that no memorable challenging events occurred. However, Stoicism is a lived philosophy which we apply to our lives, and so hypomnema really comes into its own when we use an entry to analyze events, our sense impressions, the judgments we formed about these impressions, and the actions that were produced by those judgments. One famous example of a hypomnema is the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. We also discussed another hypomnema in an earlier episode of the Sunday Stoic, Attic Nights by Aulus Gellius, the episode on proto-passions, also known as first movements. Many scholars and philosophers in antiquity appear to have kept hypomnema journals. They would not have put in all that effort if they were not deriving something worthwhile from the practice. We will examine what value they may have been deriving from the spiritual exercise as this episode progresses. What is Prosoche? In The Inner Citadel, Pierre Hadot describes Prosoche as the fundamental Stoic attitude. Prosoche is the continuous, rigid attention to the present moment, our present sense impressions, our judgments of those impressions, and the formation of appropriate actions in response to those impressions and judgments. The traits that define human excellence are our rationality and our social nature. Incorporating Prosoche into our Stoic practice helps us to become better examples of humanity in both our rationality and the fulfillment of our social roles and duties. Without consistent attention to our impressions and how to respond appropriately, we surrender one of the defining traits of humanity, our rationality. We become more like the rest of the animal kingdom, taking in sense impressions and reacting unreflectively, input, output. It is perfectly fine for other species of animals to unreflectively react to sense impressions. However, it is shameful for humans to conduct themselves in the same manner. Stoic practitioners aspire to a higher calling, consistent appropriate action through proper reflection on impressions. We are called upon to examine our impressions throughout the day, but it is particularly important when we detect the beginnings of emotional turbulence, signaling the beginning of what may become a passion. Rather than automatically reacting, Stoic practitioners withhold assent to the impression that something bad is happening, and examine our judgments before acting. Without that process of reflection and analysis, we are not truly acting. Instead, we are reacting, no more than a passenger. Our automatic emotional responses are in the driver's seat. When you operate in that manner, you are leaving it to chance whether you behave appropriately, and the chances are slim that unreflective behavior will be appropriate. especially under adverse conditions. I have heard of some Stoic practitioners that journal as part of their morning practice. However, I think it is more common to journal as part of the evening practice after the studies and events of the day have transpired, and there is time to take some quiet moments to reflect on the day's events, actions, and the thought processes that produced them. This is where we can begin to see where a hypomnema journal ties into prosoche. When we journal in a hypomnema and write out the noteworthy sense impressions from our day, and the way we formed judgments about those impressions, and then chose to act in response to those impressions, we are carefully examining our thoughts. We are making progress to follow the ancient maximal admonition inscribed on the temple of the Oracle of Delphi, to know thyself. Making progress toward knowing ourselves was central to the philosophy of the intellectual ancestor of the Stoic school, Socrates. And you could do worse than emulating Socrates, who famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Hypomnema provides us the opportunity to reflect on what we did well, and more importantly, where we fell short of the ideal. In the heat of the moment, it can sometimes be difficult to remember and apply all the relevant Stoic principles, maxims, and aphorisms. In the evening, we have the luxury of the time to carefully analyze events and to research Stoic texts, and perhaps even texts from other philosophical schools. This careful reflection helps us to respond better the next time similar circumstances present themselves. History does not repeat, but it often rhymes. When we encounter a similar situation in the future, if we find it challenging to respond appropriately, we can remember that we responded in a less than ideal manner the last time around, but afterwards we carefully reflected and developed a better action plan consistent with Stoic principles. That can provide the framework for appropriate action in the present moment, and it is by performing appropriate actions in the present moment that we make progress toward virtue. And remember, virtue is the only true good, the only thing that truly matters. Before taking the Prosoche course with the College of Stoic Philosophers, I did not keep a journal, and it was an adjustment to start the practice. In the past, in the absence of a journal, there were occasions following particularly dramatic events in my life where I would write out what I referred to as after-action reviews on Facebook. In these after-action reviews, I would analyze what I did well and what I could have done better. But in that public forum, while I obviously felt free to share my triumphs, I may have felt reluctant to go into exhaustive detail about all my shortcomings. In a private hypomnema journal, you can feel free to really get into your errors and all their disappointing majesty. And it is a reflection on the shameful moments where you fell short that offer the most opportunity for improvement. Be thorough and honest, but don't be too harsh with yourself. Remember, only the Stoic sage would be perfect in their judgments and responses to sense impressions. However, it is unclear whether a Stoic sage, the perfectly wise person, has ever walked the earth. They are as rare as the phoenix rising from the ashes. For the rest of us, imperfect progressors walking the path, incremental improvements are the best we can hope for, forever making progress toward virtue without ever reaching our destination. But the journey is worthwhile, and our striving to fulfill our social roles and duties makes the world a better place for ourselves and for our fellow humans. A hypomnema journal is an excellent spiritual exercise to assist us on the path toward virtue through careful reflection on our thought processes and adjustments that need to be made to our value judgments and character. For those who think that a hypomnema journal sounds like too much work to be tenable, I have some suggestions. While I think there is something to the idea that writing things by hand helps you to absorb information, I find it impractical. So, rather than scribe my thoughts on parchment with a feather quill, I keep my hypomnema journal in the cloud. And because typing long entries on a phone screen can be cumbersome, I often use voice to text. Another advantage of the online journal is that it is not always practical to carry a physical journal, but 21st century humans rarely go any place without their phone on their person. I find that I have my most productive reflections while walking, and I can pause briefly in my walk and use voice to text to quickly record my thoughts for later refinement. Most hypomnema journal entries are unlikely to ever be read by another person. However, I find it helpful when writing an entry to imagine that I am explaining the situation and the philosophical implications to another person, similar in style to Seneca writing letters to his friend Lucilius. I imagine that I am introducing the information to my friend for the first time. That helps to flesh out the description of the event that prompted the sense impressions about which in turn a judgment was formed, and then it produced action. Having an imaginary audience who is unfamiliar with Stoicism also helps you to flesh out the philosophical concepts applicable to the event. This might sound like a lot for an evening practice, but what I do is roughly outline my thoughts the day of, and then go back and refine and expand the entry in the next day, or even the next couple days. The refinements can take place at any time of day, not just in the evening. My goal during the revision and editing process is to make it polished enough that I would be hypothetically willing to let other people read it. In fact, some Hypomnema journal entries become substantial enough that they turn into Sunday Stoic podcast episodes. Applied philosophy is a lot like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym once, work out, and then look in the mirror and expect to be wowed by immediate results. It takes effort in the gym over time, and gradual improvements before you start to see significant results. Similarly, when you pursue the philosophical life, you can't just read one book or listen to a podcast episode and think, okay, I got it locked in. No need to think about this again until I need it in the real world. No, it takes repetition and daily effort to really incorporate philosophical principles into your character and adjust your value judgments so that you can perform appropriate action under adverse conditions. A Hypomnema journal is an excellent way to get in that daily effort and careful reflection necessary to make progress toward improving your character. For those who want to research Hypomnema journaling further, it is spelled Hypomnema. The plural form of hypomnema is hypomnemata. There are many authors who discuss this practice. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please send us an email at sundaystoic@gmail.com. If you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on whatever platform you use to listen to us. Your feedback helps us to reach new audience members and build the podcast. We look forward to releasing a new episode next week, fate permitting, and as Steve always says, Carpe diem!